Welcome back, wanderers of the dark, to Nakora nights. Out here, deep in the Appalachian wilderness, the trails twist like veins through an ancient beast, paths that never appear on any map, and sounds that don't belong to the forest. Tonight we follow those who dared to step off the main road, the hikers, campers, and searchers who thought they knew these woods until the forest turned against them. These are 10 true Appalachia deep forest trail horror stories. Real encounters that prove some trails were never meant to be walked. Whispers that follow you no matter how fast you run. Abandoned camps still warm when found. And eyes in the dark that blink back, just once, before disappearing. Before we step into the trees, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Because in the Appalachian woods, time doesn't move the same way after sunset. If you're brave enough to keep walking, smash that like button, subscribe, and comment below, I survived the trails. Now, grab your flashlight, keep your voice low, and whatever you do, don't stray from the path. This is 10 untold most disturbing, true Appalachia deep forest trails horror stories. Let's begin. I never believed silence could scream until that night, and when it did, it sounded like the woods were trying to warn me. My name is Lucas Wren, though most people in town still call me the Trail Watcher. I'm not a ranger anymore, not after what happened 3 years ago in the Blue Hollow District, a section of forest so deep even the maps pretend it doesn't exist. After that, I took a quiet post in the Appalachia deep forest trails, running weather checks, visitor logs, and emergency call-ins from an old wooden outpost near the ridge. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me close to what I loved, the wilderness, the peace, the kind of quiet that lets you hear yourself think. Except, peace has an edge. You don't notice it until it cuts. That evening, my shift ended around 7:45 p.m., but I stayed behind, pretending to organize old logs. The rain had started slow, then turned into sheets slamming the windows. I could feel the wood strain under the pressure, the old boards groaning like they wanted to speak. Thunder rolled across the valleys, low and rhythmic, like the earth had a heartbeat. Everyone else had gone downhill hours before, sensible people. But me, I lingered. Maybe I didn't want to face the empty cabin waiting for me below. Maybe I just liked the company of the storm. The outpost stood halfway up a forgotten ridge, surrounded by pines that bent into one another until their branches formed perfect arches, like 100 wooden gateways leading nowhere. Those trees were older than our records, planted when the first settlers thought they could tame the land. The forest doesn't forget that kind of arrogance. By 8:21 p.m., the lights flickered twice, then steadied. I cracked the door open just enough to feel the wet air on my face, the smell of pine and lightning mixed into something sharp. Then I saw it, headlights, faint through the fog, moving up the service road. That road isn't public. It's barely even maintained. Only staff trucks and maintenance jeeps use it, and certainly not during a thunderstorm like this. The lights crawled closer until a dark sedan rolled into the clearing and stopped. Engine humming, windshield wipers cutting through rain, but nobody got out. I waited. 1 minute. 2, then 5. The car just sat there, its beams slicing the mist, like eyes refusing to blink. I thought about calling it in, but my radio was already crackling from the storm. I squinted through the glass, trying to see movement inside. Nothing. Not even a shadow shifting. A chill crawled up my spine. I shut the door, turned off the lamp, and crouched behind my desk. My hand found the flashlight, but I didn't click it on. Outside, rain smacked against the windows, drowning out everything except the sound of my heart. Then came the scrape. Metal against metal. The driver's side door opened. I rose just enough to peek. A man stepped out, tall, soaked, hair plastered to his scalp. He didn't move like someone lost. He moved like someone looking. His head turned, scanning the tree line then the outpost. When his eyes found the window where I hid, he didn't flinch. He just stared. No curiosity. No fear. Just recognition. Something inside me said, "Don't move." He leaned back into the car, and the headlights swiveled away, cutting across the woods before vanishing into darkness. The sound of the engine faded, but the rain didn't. I sat there for a long time, flashlight still in my hand, waiting for the knock that never came. It should have ended there, but it didn't. By 9:13 p.m., the thunder had slowed, rolling far off like a memory. I climbed the creaking stairs to the loft window, east-facing, overlooking the slope. The ridge glowed pale under the moonlight breaking through mist. It looked peaceful, almost gentle, but the forest doesn't stay gentle for long. That's when I saw the lights again. Not from the road, behind the station this time. Headlights flashing in odd bursts, like a signal. 2 blinks. Pause. 3 blinks. Long silence. Then darkness. Then darkness. My breath caught. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. Movement flickered at the edge of the tree line. He was there. The same man, but this time he wasn't coming from the car. He stepped out of the woods behind the fence, right where the trail splits toward a section we closed years ago. That area was supposed to be sealed. Too many sinkholes, unstable terrain, but he climbed over like the barrier didn't exist. No flashlight, no sound, just slow, deliberate motion. I grabbed the radio, but my fingers trembled. The mic slipped twice before I finally pressed transmit. My voice came out cracked, saying something like, "Man in restricted zone, no ID, approaching station." Dispatch tried to answer, but the storm buried their reply in static. Then came the scratching. It wasn't metal this time, it was sharper, a dragging noise across the window downstairs. My whole body went rigid. I could almost hear the pattern, long, short, long, like he was writing something into the glass. I stepped down the stairs as quietly as I could, each board sighing under my weight. The kitchen window came into view. And there he was. His hand was pressed flat against the glass, fingers splayed wide. No knock, no word. Just waiting, his face half hidden by reflection, but his eyes, they didn't blink. When the floodlights snapped on, the yard exploded in white. He flinched, turned, and ran, fast. I watched him vanish into the trees. The branches swayed, forming those arch-shaped gateways again, and for a second, it looked like they swallowed him. At 2:17 a.m., police arrived. 2 officers, wet, tired, irritated. They found the back fence torn open and footprints leading to the kitchen window. One of them crouched and touched a small puddle on the ground. "Fresh," he said. The other lifted a piece of barbed wire, cleanly sliced. They searched the woods until dawn. Nothing. When the sun finally broke through, I followed the trail down the ridge myself. The mud held clear prints, boots, size 11 maybe, heavy sole. They led into the forest, deeper, toward a section we called Trail 13, the one we'd fenced off years ago after a rescue team went missing. Nobody ever reopened it. But I did. The forest was quiet, too quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just the sound of my own breath. The pines bent overhead into perfect arches, sunlight barely touching the ground. A mile in, I saw something glinting near a tree stump, a bear trap. Freshly set, but there were footprints beside it. Human ones. I backed away slowly. My radio hissed with static, then cleared just long enough to whisper my name, Lucas. The voice wasn't dispatch. It was mine. I turned off the radio, but the whisper came again, closer, from between the trees. I ran. Branches slapped my face, roots grabbed my boots, and when I reached the outpost clearing again, my tent, the one I'd set up outside the station, was gone. No, not gone, moved. 10 feet to the left. Stakes still in the ground, like someone had carefully shifted it while I was inside. I tore it open, empty. My bag, my flashlight, even the notebook I'd left zipped in the corner, gone. Only one thing remained. A single wet handprint on the canvas. By afternoon, the forest had gone quiet again. The police chalked it up to weather, nerves, imagination. They told me to take a few days off, maybe head to town, rest up. I nodded, but I didn't leave. Something in those woods wasn't finished. The next night, I sat by the window, no lights on, listening. At 11:42 p.m., I heard footsteps. Not fast, slow, gravel crunching outside. Then, a knock. Not on the door, on the glass. Same rhythm as before. Long, short, long. I didn't move. The knock came again, louder this time. I reached for the flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed toward the sound. Nothing. Just the reflection of my own face staring back. Until it smiled. But I wasn't smiling. The window cracked. And then everything went black. When I woke, it was daylight. The outpost door hung open, wind moving through empty halls. My radio blinked with a red light, a message waiting. I pressed play. "You left the gate open, Lucas." Static swallowed the rest. I looked out toward the trail. The trees bent together, forming that same impossible arch, shadowed and waiting. And beyond them, headlights. 2 of them, low, moving. I think they've been waiting for me to come back. Maybe that's the trick the forest plays. It doesn't chase you. It waits until you belong to it again. And I think I already do. I always thought silence was peace until I learned it could watch you back. The first night I spent in the deep folds of the Appalachian forest, I understood that quiet doesn't always mean alone. It was the kind of silence that had a pulse, breathing with the trees, waiting for someone foolish enough to listen too long. Before that summer, I was a student just trying to outrun my own noise. My name is Clive. I had finished a brutal semester at the University of Richmond, where exhaustion had carved shadows under my eyes and a breakup had taken the rest of my spirit. When the school offered a seasonal posting for an environmental surveyor, I grabbed it without thinking. The job was simple: map trails, collect soil data, report wildlife disturbances. They promised a small stipend and a roof above my head. What they didn't mention was that the roof would creak like a living thing and the woods would whisper when the wind stopped. They assigned me to a place called Cold Hollow Preserve, near the border of Kentucky. The name alone felt like a warning, but I was too numb to care. My supervisor, a man named Briggs, met me at the ranger outpost, a squat building with faded siding and a porch that sagged like it had given up. Briggs barely looked up from his clipboard. His beard was uneven, eyes sunk deep, voice slow and low like a man who'd been speaking to trees too long. He handed me 2 rusted keys, one tagged cabin, the other marked barn. He told me the barn had been condemned years ago, full of mold and old tools, not worth the trouble. "Don't open it," he said, "just keep to your work." Then he climbed into his truck, tires grinding the gravel, and left me with the sound of cicadas and a heavy kind of stillness that made my chest feel hollow. The cabin was small, 1 room with a narrow cot, a desk, and windows fogged from age. The air smelled of pine and wet stone. I unpacked my duffel, set my notebooks on the desk, and tried to feel lucky. For the first few days, I worked in steady silence, tracing the loops of the forest trails. I marked fallen branches, fixed broken signs, and took comfort in the rhythm of my boots on dirt. The forest was enormous, the canopy thick enough to keep daylight at a distance. Birds called like questions, distant and lonely. By the 4th day, I began to notice how the trees seemed closer than before, as if they'd leaned in during the night. When I turned my head too fast, I'd catch glimpses of movement, but nothing solid, just shadows curling between trunks. Still, I felt calm in the work, until one evening when I returned from a 6-mile circuit and saw the barn door open halfway. I stopped cold. I hadn't touched that barn since Briggs warned me off it. The padlock still hung from the latch, open, swinging slightly like it had been undone a moment before. I hesitated, the air colder near that doorway, as if the forest was holding its breath. When I pushed the door, the hinges cried out like something alive. Inside, dust coated everything, thick and untouched. No tools, no crates, just emptiness. The wooden floor was pale beneath the moonlight slanting in through a crack in the roof. I took 1 step inside and the sound of my boots echoed like I'd stepped into a hollow body. The smell was wrong too. Not rot, not earth, something metallic, faintly sweet. I looked around once, heart thudding, and stepped out. I closed the door, pressed the lock through the latch, and walked away without looking back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing a creak outside, then nothing, then the dry shuffle of leaves. When I finally dozed, I dreamed of standing in the woods, watching a figure half seen between trees. It was turned away from me, head tilted as if listening. When it turned, its face was smooth, featureless, like a blank mask carved from pale bark. I woke sweating, the sound of the wind gone still. Morning brought a kind of fragile normalcy until I noticed the padlock was missing. The barn door was closed tight, but the latch hung open, empty. I searched the ground, the porch, under the steps. Nothing. When I looked inside again, the barn was the same, only this time there was something small resting in the middle of the floor. A family photo, black and white, edges curled. 5 people stood in front of a house, faces faint under age, but one face had been rubbed away, the graphite gray where the head should have been. My skin went cold. I left the photo where it was and shut the door again. That evening, the woods grew darker faster than before. I bolted the cabin windows, brought my work hatchet inside, and set it next to the cot. I told myself it was just wind and old locks, but as the night thickened, the air grew heavy, pressing down until I could hear nothing but the rhythm of my pulse. Then, around 2:17 a.m., I heard gravel crunching outside, slow, uneven steps. I froze, gripping the hatchet handle, my breath held tight. The steps circled the cabin once, then again stopping near the door. I didn't look. I couldn't. The silence afterward was louder than any scream could have been. When dawn came, the lock was back again, lying in the middle of the barn floor, perfectly centered, dust undisturbed. The next day, I called Briggs. No answer. The ranger station rang and rang, voicemail full. I tried again that night, still nothing. I went to bed early, lights out, hatchet by my hand. Sometime after midnight, the sound began again, wood bending, hinges sighing. The cabin door creaked open by an inch, then another. I couldn't breathe. From that crack came the sound of breathing, slow and patient, the kind of sound a body makes when it knows you're listening. I counted my heartbeats, waited for it to end. After what felt like hours, the door eased shut again, the latch settling back with a soft click. I stayed awake until morning. When light touched the room, I saw something on the cot right where my head had rested, a pine cone, small, perfect, no dirt on it, placed neatly in the center of my blanket. I packed that morning. I couldn't think straight, but as I loaded my bag, something caught my eye near the tree line behind the barn. A ring of stones had appeared overnight, arranged in a perfect circle, about 3 feet wide. Inside it, feathers and bones were laid out like a rug, a dead bird splayed flat as if pressed by unseen hands. The sight made my stomach twist. I backed away, too shaken to go closer. I hiked into town, but the trail felt wrong. The trees leaned closer, trunks darker, roots bulging from the soil like veins. Somewhere to my right, I heard water trickling where no stream should be. I turned and froze. At the edge of the path, the ground had split, and from that crack a hand reached up, fingers gray, skin rough like stone. It twitched once, then stilled, as if remembering what life had felt like. I stumbled back, dropped my pack, and ran until my lungs burned. By the time I reached the dirt road, the world looked washed out. The sky seemed too pale, too stretched. I waved down an old truck and climbed in without words. The driver, a quiet man with weathered skin, looked at me once and said nothing. As we drove, I glanced back through the window. The forest line rippled. The trees seemed to shift as if something among them was moving in parallel. When I finally reached the ranger station, the building was empty, the door unlocked. Inside, papers scattered across the floor, and the desk where Briggs had sat was covered in maps marked with red circles, each one around a cabin site like mine. At the bottom of the map, written in faint pencil, were the words, "Don't let it hear you breathe." I left that same night. I don't know how long I drove before the trees thinned and the mountains faded. For weeks after, I woke at strange hours, always between 2 and 3 in the morning, to the faint sound of gravel moving outside my window. Once, I found a pine cone resting on my kitchen counter. Another night, a photograph slid under my door. The same family, the same erased face. I tried to move cities, to outrun it, but the silence followed, always one step behind. Sometimes, in crowded places, I catch the faintest sound, A slow, careful breath just over my shoulder, and I freeze, knowing the woods never really let me leave. They say the forest keeps what it claims. I don't know if that's true, but sometimes, when I dream, I see the barn door open again, the lock swinging gentle, and the erased face turning toward me from the shadows, waiting for me to breathe too loud. And every time I wake just before I see its eyes, the silence thick as pine sap, listening. I never wanted to go there, but I had no choice. My parents thought it would be good for me. They said I spent too much time on my phone, too much time hiding behind screens. They said a trip to the mountains would clear our heads, give us air that didn't smell like the city. I remember sitting in the backseat of our car, knees pressed against my backpack, the highway rolling under us for what felt like forever, thinking that this trip was already a mistake. My name is Noah, and I was 17 that spring. I used to think bad things only happened in cities, in dark alleys or old buildings with broken lights. I didn't understand that sometimes the scariest places are the ones that look peaceful from far away. My dad was a quiet man, worked as a civil engineer, the kind who fixed things for other people but never had time to fix himself. My mom was the type who believed everything could be solved by a weekend away. She loved words like unplug, reconnect, and simplicity. They found a place called Hollow Creek Cabin through some last-minute rental post. It was deep in the Appalachian region, near a stretch of forest called Ashwater Trails. My mom said it sounded poetic. To me, it sounded lonely. We drove for 8 hours straight, then turned off onto smaller roads that kept getting worse. The asphalt broke into gravel, the gravel into mud, and soon there was no signal, no houses, no lights, only trees, miles of them. They rose high and twisted over the trail like they wanted to close it off. Their trunks looked wrong somehow, thick and bulging with patches of bark that formed shapes too close to faces. When I blinked, the faces seemed to shift, eyes sliding to the sides, mouths stretching. My mom said the trees had personality, that the mountains had stories. I remember forcing a smile and turning away. When we reached the cabin, the sun was low, turning the mist orange. It was 2 floors, wooden, worn down by rain and time. Moss climbed up the posts. A broken rocking chair sat on the porch. The door had 2 locks and a thick chain, heavy like it was meant for something more than privacy. I remember my dad jingling it in his hand saying, "Old places, you know, better safe than sorry." I was given the loft upstairs, just an open space above the living room with one railing that overlooked the couch and the wood stove. It smelled like damp pine and smoke. The cabin didn't have internet, no signal, no TV, just a few dusty books and a deck of cards. My mom was thrilled. My dad was already looking at his work files on his phone, pretending not to notice the empty bars in the corner of the screen. That night, we cooked canned soup, listened to the wind creak through the walls, and tried to convince ourselves we were relaxed. I remember lying in the loft staring down at the living room, the dim light from the oil lamp flickering over the walls. The animal skulls outside rattled in the wind. I told myself it was normal. I told myself old cabins just made noises. The next morning we hiked to a place called Devil's Ridge Falls, a few miles south. The path wound through narrow trails where the forest floor was soft, almost too soft, like the ground had been freshly dug. My dad joked that wild animals might have been foraging, but when I looked closer, the dirt wasn't scattered. It was smooth, shaped by hands, not paws. The falls were beautiful, though. Water spilled over the rocks into small, clear pools, and for a few hours, it felt like the trip might actually be okay. My mom laughed. My dad smiled, the kind of smile that made me forget how much he worked. But around 2:30 p.m., clouds started rolling in fast. The sky turned dark purple, the air heavy and cold. We rushed back to the car, thunder cracking behind us. By the time we reached the trail leading to the cabin, rain was pouring so hard we could barely see through the windshield. That's when we noticed it. The cabin door was open. Wide open. My mom's voice cut through the sound of the rain. I locked it when we left. It wasn't a question. My dad said nothing. He pulled up the car halfway up the muddy rise and told us to stay put. Then he grabbed the flashlight and climbed out into the storm. I watched him through the window, his shirt plastered to his back, the light bobbing as he stepped onto the porch. The rain blurred everything. He was gone for 3 long minutes before he came back, face tight, eyes darting. He said nothing was touched, no sign of anyone breaking in. Maybe the wind pushed it open, he said. My mom didn't believe that. I could tell by the way she kept twisting her wedding ring. Inside, the air felt colder. Everything looked the same except for one thing. The small reading lamp next to my sleeping bag in the loft was on. I hadn't used it, not that morning, not ever. It was one of those clip-on lights you have to press hard to switch. I unplugged it, but my hands were shaking. That night, the storm didn't stop. The rain hit the roof like fists. Around 10:15 p.m., I sat in the loft reading by flashlight because I couldn't sleep. The power had flickered twice already. Then, beneath the thunder, I heard a scraping sound, soft, dragging across the wood just outside the loft. I froze. It was the kind of sound someone makes when they slide a foot, slow and careful. I moved to the railing, heart hammering. I couldn't see the bottom of the stairs from my angle, just the floor below the couch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I saw it. A shadow crossing from one side of the stairs base to the other, smooth and deliberate. I ducked down instantly, breath caught in my throat. I grabbed my phone. One single bar of service flickered on. I texted my dad downstairs. Someone's in the cabin. Then I waited. I heard quick steps on the stairs, heavy, fast. My dad's voice whispered my name, and I ran toward him. He didn't ask questions, just grabbed my arm and led me down. We were halfway to the bottom when something slammed upstairs, a sound like a full body hitting the floor. Then footsteps, running, toward us. My dad turned, grabbing the fireplace poker. The front door burst open so hard it cracked against the wall. A man ran through barefoot, dripping wet, eyes wide like he couldn't see us at all. He bolted straight through the living room, past my dad, and out into the woods, gone in seconds. My dad chased him to the porch but didn't go farther. He stopped right at the edge, like something was keeping him from crossing. When my mom came running from the kitchen, he just said, "Stay inside." She took the car and drove down the trail until she found signal enough to call the sheriff. They arrived an hour later. The rain had washed everything clean. No tracks, no prints, no broken locks. The sheriff said maybe it was a hiker, disoriented, lost in the storm. My dad nodded but didn't look convinced. That night, none of us slept. The wind groaned against the walls like voices just out of earshot. Around 2:17 a.m., I thought I heard that same scraping again, right under my bed this time. I told myself it was branches against the cabin side. I didn't dare look. Morning brought sunlight, but it didn't help. My mom wanted to leave. My dad said just one more day. He wanted to make sure everything was safe before we packed. He walked the trails alone that afternoon while I sat on the porch steps watching the woods. That's when I noticed the swing. It hung from an old oak in the middle of the clearing, a child's swing made of wood and rope, swaying slowly back and forth. There was no wind, none at all. The trees were still, the air thick. The swing kept moving, smooth, rhythmic, as if someone invisible was sitting there. Later that evening, my dad came back pale. He said he found something strange near the stream, a patch of dirt dug up, too neat to be an animal hole. I went with him to see it. The soil was dark and soft, shaped like a grave. No stones, no markings, just a perfect rectangle of freshly turned earth. My stomach twisted. That night, around 9:45 p.m., the lights flickered again. I lay awake listening to the house breathe. The wood popped, the wind sighed, then from outside came a slow creaking sound. It took me a moment to realize it was the swing, moving again. I stood at the window, watching it sway, and then I saw something behind it between the trees. A shape, not quite human, too tall, with shoulders that bent inward like branches curling. It didn't move at first. Then its head turned toward me, and the faces in the bark around it seemed to ripple, mouths opening in silent screams. I fell back, heart hammering. When I looked again, it was gone. I ran downstairs, breathless, but my parents were already awake. My mom said she heard humming outside. My dad grabbed the poker again and told us to stay behind him. The air inside the cabin felt electric, buzzing like a storm. Then, from the wall near the front door, the chain lock rattled on its own, not shaking in the wind pulling, like someone testing it. My dad stepped forward. The sound stopped. We didn't speak again that night. We sat on the couch until dawn, the fire low, our eyes on the door. The moment the sun broke through the fog, my mom said we were leaving. No one argued. As we packed, I went to grab my bag from the loft and stopped halfway up. There were footprints. Wet, dark, leading from the window to where my bed had been. They weren't ours. The size was wrong, barefoot, but long, narrow, the toes sharp at the ends like claws. I didn't tell my parents. I just followed them to the car, forcing myself not to look back. When we reached the main road, I finally turned to see the cabin one last time. Through the trees, just for a second, I thought I saw something standing by the porch. Tall, thin, head tilted. And the swing still moving. We never talked about it after. My parents refused to. They said it was just mountain stories, that isolation can make people imagine things. But sometimes, late at night when the house creaks, I remember that sound. The soft scraping, the rattling chain, the hollow thud from above. And sometimes, when I dream, I see those bark faces shifting, their mouths moving like they're whispering my name. I haven't gone back to the mountains since, but every spring, when the storms roll in and the sky turns that same bruised gray, I can still hear it in my head, like something calling from far away, waiting for me to return. And sometimes I wonder, if I ever did go back, what would I find buried beneath that patch of earth near the stream, and whose swing would be waiting there, moving in the still air without wind, waiting for someone else to sit down. I always thought silence was safe, that if I could just get far enough away from people, their noise, their lies, their pretending, maybe I could breathe again. When I signed up for the winter caretaker post at Black Hollow Reserve, it wasn't courage that brought me there, it was escape. My name's Aaron Clay, 34 years old, and that year everything I'd built cracked like thin ice. My father died, my relationship ended in a slow-motion disaster, and my head felt like a locked room I couldn't get out of. So when the Park Service offered temporary isolation work, watching over old cabins, logging weather, making sure no hikers froze to death in November, I said yes before they even finished explaining it. I didn't ask how deep the forest went or what had happened to the guy before me. The cabin sat 5 miles off the nearest dirt road, halfway up a ridge that always looked like dusk even at noon. They called it Station 9, but that made it sound busier than it was. It was just one crooked wooden room with a stove, a narrow cot, a desk, and a shortwave radio that groaned more than it worked. My shift ran from midnight to 6 a.m., alone. The purpose, at least on paper, was to monitor trail activity and record temperature every hour. In truth, I was just there in case something went wrong, and nothing ever did. The forest that winter felt like another planet. The trees didn't whisper, they breathed. Their branches groaned in wind like the bones of something ancient turning over in its sleep. Nights were so still that my heartbeat felt too loud. But for the first week, I loved it. I needed the nothingness. I'd sit by the stove, drink coffee that tasted like burnt metal, read old trail reports, and feel the static in my mind finally start to settle. I chopped wood, listened to the occasional crackle of the radio, and sometimes just stared through the window into the endless dark, letting myself disappear inside it. By my 8th night, I could walk that tiny cabin blindfolded. The rhythm of wind, rain, and the faint hum of the stove became almost hypnotic. Then, on the 9th night, something changed. It started with rain, hard, violent rain that turned the roof into a drum. Around 11:30 p.m., thunder rolled so deep it shook my coffee mug. I remember sitting at the desk, sorting through a stack of damp trail maps, when I saw something move through the window. Just a flicker at first, like light bending wrong. I leaned closer. There, at the edge of the porch, stood a man. He wasn't holding a flashlight, wasn't moving at all. Just standing there in the downpour, coat-soaked, face lifted slightly toward the porch roof. His arms hung at his sides like strings cut from a puppet. Rain ran down him, But he didn't shiver or wipe it away. I waited, thinking maybe he'd knock or call out. Instead, he started patting his coat like he was looking for pockets. The movements were slow and mechanical, too exaggerated, like he'd seen humans do it once and was trying to copy it. Then, as smoothly as he'd appeared, he turned and walked back into the trees. No hesitation, no flashlight, no crunch of boots and wet leaves. Just gone. I stood frozen, one hand on the map I'd been holding. Logic kicked in a second later. Maybe he was a lost hiker, disoriented. People did dumb things out here. I convinced myself that's all it was. Then, sometime after midnight, the radio clicked on. It wasn't static this time. It was a voice. Calm, flat, too steady. It said, "Hey, I'm just down near the old bridge. Got a little bag here. Mind giving me a hand bringing it up?" There was no background noise. No rain, no wind, no hint of static. Just that voice. I picked up the receiver and asked for his name. Asked if he was registered at the base station. Standard stuff. Silence followed for a few seconds. Then, in the exact same tone, the voice said, "Just a small bag. Don't want to carry it uphill." Click. Dead air. I stared at the radio, my hand trembling slightly. The power meter flickered even though the battery was full. I told myself it was some prank or interference from another station. I got up, stood by the door, waited to hear footsteps on the trail. But there was only the storm. Then came a single knock. Just one. I opened the inner door slowly, heart hammering. He was there again. The same man from before, standing on the porch, drenched but untouched by mud. His hair was slicked back neatly, not messy from rain. No bag, no pack, nothing. He was close enough that I could see the raindrops sliding down his cheeks but stopping before his lips. He said without blinking, "Can you help me bring up a small bag from the trail?" I didn't open the screen door. I stepped back, said I couldn't leave the post, offered him shelter, told him to come in if he needed warmth. He didn't respond. Just tilted his head slightly, stared at the floorboards between us, and repeated slower this time, "I don't want to carry it uphill." Every muscle in me locked up. My throat went dry. The air felt thick, heavy, like the entire forest was holding its breath. I told him again, firmly, that he could come inside, that I'd call for help. He didn't blink, didn't react. Then he turned, stepped off the porch, and disappeared into the trees, silent, effortless, like the dark itself swallowed him. I bolted the door, turned off every light except my flashlight. The storm dragged on, softer now, but I couldn't sit. I stood there for hours just watching the door and the window. Every creak of wood sounded like a footstep. Once, around 3:15 a.m., the radio hissed with static. Between the noise, I heard something, my own name, whispered like breath. I froze, listening, but it didn't repeat. The cabin's clock ticked louder than it ever had before. When dawn finally broke, I grabbed my coat, the backup radio, and stepped outside. I needed to see. The rain had stopped. The world smelled of wet earth and pine. The trail glistened with silver puddles. Everything looked normal. No footprints, no sign of anyone. But as I reached the old footbridge, a small wooden span over a creek about half a mile down, I noticed something wedged between the slats. It was a sock. Gray, ordinary, but perfectly dry. Everything else around it was soaked. I crouched down and stared. The wood was still dripping, my boots left wet marks, yet that sock looked freshly washed. I didn't touch it. My breath came out cold, sharp. That's when I saw the sign beside the bridge, an old faded trail marker I'd passed every night without noticing. Someone had carved into it, fresh enough that the shavings were still pale against the dark wood. My name, Aaron Clay, followed by that day's date. The wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. The forest fell into a silence so deep it felt alive. No birds, no water, no sound at all, like the world had paused mid-inhale. My skin prickled as if the trees were watching. I backed away slowly and walked fast up the trail without turning around. That morning, I radioed for transfer. They asked what happened. I told them I wasn't sure. The officer on the other end said the storm had knocked out the signal all night. that no one could have called me from another post. I didn't argue. I packed, left everything but my knife, and started down the mountain. Halfway down, I found something else. Another trail sign, this one half buried in mud. The date carved on it wasn't today. It was tomorrow. I don't remember the walk back. I just remember the sound, or the absence of it, and the feeling that something had already decided I wasn't supposed to leave. It's been 3 years since that night. I still can't stand heavy rain. Sometimes when I'm half asleep, I hear a knock, just one in a calm voice saying, "Can you help me bring up a small bag?" The doctors call it trauma. Maybe they're right. But last month, I saw a post online from a hiker near Black Hollow Ridge. He said he found a single dry sock on a soaked trail, wedged between 2 slats of an old bridge, and on a nearby sign, someone had carved a name and date that wasn't his. It was mine. The date was tomorrow. Now I keep a flashlight by my bed, and every night around 2:17 a.m., I wake up without knowing why, heart pounding, listening for rain that isn't there. The air always feels heavy, like something standing just outside the door, waiting for me to open it. I never planned to end up alone in the middle of the Blue Hollow Forest. It was supposed to be a short seasonal job, something quiet, something simple. Funny how silence can start out like peace and end up feeling like a trap that breathes with you. My name's Mason Hale. I grew up outside a small town in West Virginia, one of those forgotten places with empty stores and peeling gas pumps. I worked in a warehouse for years, folding boxes, stacking pallets, breathing in air that smelled like plastic and sweat. Same days, same noise, same faces. When I quit, I told myself I just wanted to hear the world again. That's how I found the job. The Forest Service needed someone to maintain a few remote trails, clearing branches, repainting faded markers, checking erosion. No tourists, no crowds, no supervisors breathing down my neck, just trees, mud, wind, and me. They assigned me a small loop out in the Blue Hollow Appalachian region, an unmarked section hidden between mile markers nobody even remembered. It didn't have an official name. The rangers called it the Ghost Loop, half as a joke, half as a warning. The first few weeks were exactly what I needed. The woods were endless and quiet in a way cities could never be. I'd start before sunrise, my boots wet with dew, and hike the loop with a shovel and a can of red paint. I learned every inch of that trail, the rocks, the roots, the smell of the pine sap when the wind came down from the ridge. There were landmarks that became familiar, a tree knot shaped like an ear, a boulder shaped like a hook halfway through the loop, and a white metal boundary marker planted right before it. The post was about 4 feet tall, numbers stamped near the base, rust creeping down one side. I'd tap it with my boot every time I passed, like a little ritual. Halfway there, keep moving. Then one day, it was gone. I didn't notice right away. I walked past the boulder, kept going, but something felt wrong. The incline was different, the air too heavy. When I stopped to check my GPS, it said I'd gone farther than usual, maybe a quarter mile. When I backtracked, the post wasn't there. Just a small hole in the dirt, the size of a coffee can. The soil was dark and freshly stirred, like something had yanked it straight out of the ground. I radioed it in. The dispatcher said to mark it and move on. I tied orange tape to a branch, made a note on my map, and did what they told me. That night, I dreamed I was back on the trail. Everything looked normal until I stepped on something hard under the soil. When I brushed it clear, I saw the white post rocking side to side, loose but not free. I woke up sweating, heart pounding. Next morning, I hiked the loop again and froze when I reached the spot. The post was back, same rust streak, same scratches, same tilt. Only now, the ground around it was smooth. No hole, no disturbed soil. My orange flag was gone. I stood there for a long time, convincing myself I must have been mistaken. Maybe I marked the wrong place. Maybe I was tired. It was easier to believe that than whatever the other option was. After that, time started slipping. I'd think it was late morning, then check my watch and see nearly evening. I replaced the battery. No change. So I brought my dad's old wind-up watch, no electronics, just gears, and it lost time too. One day, I radioed the office for my check-in. I told them it was 1:30 in the afternoon. They said it was 4:20. I stared at my watch. It said 1:30. That night, I left the woods thinking it was maybe 7:45 p.m., but when I reached my truck, it was pitch black, full stars, no twilight. After that, the forest stopped being quiet. It started listening. Landmarks began to move. The hook-shaped boulder appeared on the wrong side of the trail. The path twisted into new shapes. I turned back once, trying to find the way I came, and there was no trail behind me, just thick brush and shadows. That's when I first heard it. I'd muttered something under my breath, "Careful there." A second later, I heard it again. Same words, same rhythm, only quieter. Behind me, I froze. My radio was off. The forest was still. I tried again, whispering nonsense, green sock, banana, 7 deer bottles. Nothing. Silence. But when I said something real, almost done, it came back, delayed, breathy, like someone forcing words through a cracked throat. Almost done. After that, I stopped speaking altogether. But silence didn't help. The voice came anyway. One afternoon, I slipped on gravel, fell hard, and in my head I thought, this place hates me. And from behind the nearest tree, I heard hates me. The voice was human, not loud, not whispering, just wrong, like it was spoken through old lungs. That's when I ran, not toward the road, not toward the truck, just away. My boots pounded the trail, my breath ragged, and I heard it behind me. Footsteps matching mine, one beat behind, breathing when I breathed. When I stopped, it stopped. When I ran, it ran. The woods blurred into streaks of brown and green. I didn't know where I was until the trees broke open into the gravel lot. My hands shook so hard I dropped my keys. When I finally got inside the truck and slammed the door, the sound stopped. Not just the breathing, everything. No wind, no crickets, no sound at all. I sat there until dawn, staring at the tree line, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. I didn't go back. Didn't answer the calls from the ranger office. Didn't return the gear. But curiosity is poison. A few weeks later, I started looking things up. Old maps, missing person reports, anything about Blue Hollow. That's when I found it. A newspaper scan from 1983. A hiker was found dead out there, barefoot. Feet shredded from running. The coroner said he died of shock. They found him clutching a white boundary post in both hands. Nobody ever figured out how he pulled it out of the frozen ground. That should have been enough, but I didn't learn. I took another outdoor job wildlife survey work, tagging migration points for a research group. Different forest, different mountains. I told myself it was fine. The first night I camped, I woke to a soft pressure on the tent zipper. A fingertip pressing from the outside, dragging upward. I held my breath. The pressure stopped, then slid back down. When I checked in the morning, there was a faint smudge, oily, human. A few days later, I crossed a frozen creek. Halfway across, I saw footprints on the ice. Barefoot, clean, walking away from me. They disappeared the instant they reached the water's edge. Then came the deer. I found it near a cedar snag, half decomposed, ribs open, eyes gone. One hind leg bone was missing, cut clean through like with a saw. I told myself predators couldn't do that. I told myself not to think about it. That night, I woke at 2:17 a.m. Cold air seeped through the tent, and I felt that same slow breathing outside, steady, patient. I whispered, "Please go away." And from behind the nylon came a voice, delayed, soft, "Go away." I stopped going into the woods after that. But that didn't stop it. A month later, I was back home, trying to live like nothing had happened. One night, I woke again at 2:17 a.m. My apartment felt too quiet. I wiped the fog off my window and saw something standing under the streetlight, tall, still, holding something white in its hand. It looked like a post. I blinked, and it was gone. For days after that, I heard faint metal clinks from my walls. A slow, rhythmic tap, like someone hitting concrete with a steel rod. Once I said out loud, "Who's there?" And from the hallway I heard, "There." I sat perfectly still, listening to my heart thump against the quiet. That's when I realized it didn't matter where I went. Whatever had been in that forest wasn't stuck there anymore. It had followed me back. Maybe it always does. Maybe that's what the forest wants to be remembered. Sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I feel a small vibration through the floor, like someone dragging metal across tile. Last week, I heard 3 slow knocks on my door. I opened it to an empty hallway, but on the floor, pressed into the dust, was a thin line like a fingertip had traced the shape of a zipper from one side to the other. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening. Around 3:03 a.m., the sound started again. The faint, hollow clink of something metallic being tapped against the floor. Tap, 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 tap. And through the still air came the voice, thin, cracked, and wrong, trying to say my name. Maya, son. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I knew what would happen if I answered. Because the last time I spoke back, it didn't just repeat me. It finished my sentence. And the echo didn't sound like mine anymore. I spent that summer at a cabin deep in the folds of the Appalachia backcountry, far beyond the ridgelines where the maps began to fade and the trails turned to roots and shadows. My name's Caleb Monroe, 23, newly graduated, directionless, and tired of people telling me what to do with my life. My uncle, a man named Harold who smelled like pine and engine oil, offered me a kind of escape. He owned an old forestry cabin near a place called Briar Hollow Ridge, tucked so far into the woods you could swear the world had forgotten it. He'd torn his shoulder hauling debris for trail maintenance and needed someone to watch the place for the summer, check the markers, keep the trails clear, and make sure no drifters were squatting in the woods. It sounded simple, peaceful, maybe even healing. I didn't have a job lined up, no real plan, just that restless ache of not knowing who I was supposed to become. The thought of silence and trees instead of traffic and deadlines seemed like a good start. The drive up felt endless, the gravel road twisting upward through thickets of spruce and laurel, the kind that seemed to close in behind you once you passed. The air grew colder even in summer, and each turn revealed new scars of landslides and rockfall. My car shook from the potholes, groaning like it wanted to turn back. I stopped at a gas station before the last leg, a fading place called Marty's Stop and Bait, with peeling green paint and a rusty soda machine that buzzed louder than the cicadas. An old man behind the counter looked at me too long when I said where I was headed. He didn't say much, just muttered something about keeping an eye out after dark. I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. Once you lose cell signal up there, that's it. Just static, trees, and your own breathing. At first, it was perfect. The cabin stood on stilts above a slope, weathered and gray, with a small porch that creaked under every step. Inside, it smelled like cedar and damp. The floorboards moaned when the wind picked up, but I liked that. It felt alive. My days settled into rhythm. Wake early, brew coffee on the propane stove, hike the ridge trails, replace broken signs, and note fallen branches. Some days I saw deer, other days nothing at all. No people, no sound beyond the whisper of leaves. Evenings were quiet. I'd sit on the porch, reading from old paperbacks my uncle left, most of them about wilderness survival and local folklore. He'd scribbled notes inside, names of trails, warnings about bear tracks, a few odd sketches that looked like claw marks drawn with shaking hands. I didn't think much of them then. The first time something felt wrong, it was a Wednesday. I remember because that morning, I'd hiked out toward a junction where 2 trails met near a dried-up creek. The signpost there had snapped clean through the middle. It wasn't rotted or aged. The wood had splintered sharply, like it had been broken by sheer force. I thought maybe a bear pushed against it or someone kicked it in. Still, it felt deliberate. I replaced it and went back late afternoon, muscles aching, boots heavy with mud. The cabin looked calm, golden light spilling through the trees. I dropped into the recliner by the window, half asleep with a book in my lap, when I heard it, a creak. Not loud, just enough to slice through the silence. It came from the kitchen. At first, I thought it was a mouse under the floorboards. Old cabins breathe and shift all the time. But the air changed. The stillness felt thicker, like the room wasn't empty anymore. I lifted my head and stared across the room. The sunlight stretched in long yellow strips across the counter. Nothing moved. Still, I stood up and walked through every room. The main space, my small bedroom, the back hall leading to the gear room and bathroom, everything was locked. The window shut, but that feeling wouldn't leave, like someone was standing just out of sight. I turned on the shortwave radio for noise. Static hissed softly, comforting in a way, though every so often it cracked with what sounded like half-formed words. Whispers breaking through and fading again. Dinner didn't interest me, but I opened a can of chili and forced it down just to pass time. Every sound of the spoon against the pan felt too loud. Afterward, I cleaned the dishes, rearranged tools on the shelf I didn't need to touch, just trying to feel and control. Night fell slow, the forest turning to silhouette. I tried reading again, but I couldn't focus. The creaks overhead felt rhythmic, almost like footsteps, only there was always one step missing. A pattern, but wrong, like something walking on three legs. Sleep didn't come easy. I stared at the ceiling, listening to my heartbeat until the world blurred. When I woke, it was 2:17 a.m. No dream, just that sound again, a soft creak, closer this time, from the hallway. I held still, my breath barely moving. There was another noise, faint, like weight shifting, a slow shuffle. I slid out of bed quietly and pressed my ear to the door. Silence. My hand shook when I turned the knob. The hallway was empty. The kitchen looked the same, except the window above the sink was open wide, pushed outward like someone had forced it. I hadn't touched that window once. It was heavy, always stuck halfway, but now it was fully open. I stood in the doorway, feeling the cold air brush my face. The forest outside was dark, no moon, just black shapes of trees. Then, faintly, from somewhere near the bushes, a voice. A whisper. Not words, not anything human I could understand, just the rhythm of speech. I froze. It stopped. The silence after felt worse. I shut the window and locked it tight. That's when I heard breathing, not mine. Slow, shallow, from the gear room down the hall. Every nerve screamed, but I didn't yell. I didn't grab anything. I just turned and moved toward the front door, quiet as I could. My fingers fumbled the deadbolt. It didn't move. It wasn't jammed, just stiff, like something was holding it from the other side. The knob turned halfway, then stuck. Behind me came a faint scrape, not a step, not a drag, something else. A weight shifting. I hit the door with my shoulder. It gave with a groan, and I stumbled out barefoot onto the gravel, cutting my feet as I ran. The forest blurred past, black trunks and silver moonlight flickering between. I didn't stop until the trees thinned and I reached the ranger station near the trailhead, my chest burning, breath tearing out in broken gasps. 2 rangers were on night duty. They looked at me like I was half mad, a barefoot stranger covered in mud at nearly 3 in the morning. They wrapped a blanket around me, made coffee, and after I managed to explain, they sent 2 others to check the cabin. I waited for over an hour. The coffee went cold. Every minute stretched like a rope about to snap. When they came back, they didn't speak right away. One of them just said, "There's no one up there now," but then he hesitated. He told me the gear room door had been propped open with a splinter of bark. Inside there were footprints, bare feet, larger than mine, pressed deep into the dust. They led in 2 directions. One trail ended by the recliner, the other by the kitchen window. No prints leaving. No smudges at the door, just impressions of someone who had come in, moved, and vanished. I didn't go back. My uncle sold the place that fall, said he was done with mountain living. I didn't tell him why I really left, but some nights I still hear it. That uneven rhythm, like footsteps missing a beat, echoing through my head when the world goes quiet. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that open window and the shape of the trees beyond it, where something might still be waiting. They say the Appalachia forest holds old things, older than our maps, older than our fears. Some nights the wind sounds almost human, like it's trying to remember words it once knew. And if you ever find yourself hiking near Briar Hollow Ridge and you hear soft breathing behind you, don't look back. Because whatever walks those trails, it doesn't always leave footprints, and it never stops listening. I never meant to go back to those woods. I swore after that summer I'd never step anywhere near the Appalachian trails again. But sometimes, even when you keep your distance, the forest remembers you. It waits, quiet, patient, pretending to sleep until you stumble too close again. That's what I learned, and I learned it the hard way. I was 19 when it happened. Back then, I was trying to fill the space between high school and whatever came next. College wasn't certain, money wasn't either. My mom said I needed something constructive to do, so I joined this volunteer program run by the state, something they called the Mountain Youth Conservancy. It sounded noble, but really it was just an excuse to haul brush, dig trenches, and clear hiking routes in the deep back trails of the Appalachian ridges. They promised community hours, maybe a recommendation letter if you didn't quit early. That was enough for me. There were 5 of us all together, all strangers from nearby towns, a mix of awkward smiles and borrowed gear, each of us trying to pretend we weren't terrified of the long miles ahead. Our supervisor was a woman named Ranger Tess. She was in her mid-30s, quiet and serious, with the kind of calm that made you feel safe even when you shouldn't. She had this measured way of talking, always keeping her radio clipped tight to her belt, always checking the tree line like she expected something to step out. The first 2 days were nothing but mud and sweat. We camped near a half-dried creek where the frogs never shut up, worked through sunrise to sunset, cleared debris from old paths that probably hadn't seen hikers in decades. It was exhausting, but harmless. I remember thinking the silence was peaceful, the kind that hums in your bones. On the 3rd morning, everything changed. That day, Tess told us we'd be restoring a section of trail that didn't appear on any modern maps. It was called Old Iron Hollow, a fire road that once led to a watchtower up on Ridge 42. The tower had collapsed long ago, and the state never rebuilt it. The route was marked inaccessible, which apparently made it perfect for us to fix. We started early, air still heavy with fog. The higher we climbed, the stranger the forest felt. The trees grew closer together, twisting around each other like they didn't want to let us through. Moss thickened underfoot until the dirt path became a soft green carpet that swallowed our footprints. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just the sound of our boots sinking. After a few miles, the group started spreading out pairs checking ditches, others dragging branches off the path. I lagged behind with my shovel, trying not to breathe too loud. That's when we saw it. The cabin appeared between the trees like a mirage, so sudden and wrong that my brain hesitated to accept it. It leaned crooked on its foundation, one corner sunken into the earth. The roof drooped inward like a collapsed chest, shingles stripped by rain and time. The wood was gray and warped, every inch crawling with ivy. And yet somehow, it didn't look destroyed, just stuck, like it had been preserved in the exact moment it died. Tess stopped walking first. She stared at it for a long time, frowning, her hand hovering near her radio. "This isn't on any records," she said under her breath. "There shouldn't be anything here." We asked if it might have been an old ranger station, but she shook her head. "No. The survey maps don't mention any structures in this section. We weren't supposed to head back until late afternoon, so she decided to leave us there while she returned to fetch a toolkit we'd left at a clearing about a mile behind. She told us to rest, drink water, and not go inside the cabin. Said she'd be gone 15 minutes. She barely vanished down the trail when Cass, one of the girls in our group, called out from the side of the cabin, "Hey, you guys need to see this." We circled around to find her crouched beside a rusted mailbox. The thing was tilted sideways, half buried in the dirt, yet the metal flap still moved smoothly when she opened it. Inside was a single envelope. It was yellowed with age, sealed with a thick wax stamp that looked like someone had dripped it straight from a candle and never let it dry. Across the front, in a spidery hand, one word was written, "Marlin." Cass laughed nervously, passed it to me. The paper felt too light, like it was missing something inside, like it had been emptied of weight. We joked about it being cursed mail or love letters from a ghost. I almost threw it back in the box, but something about the handwriting held my eyes. It looked deliberate but unsteady, like whoever wrote it was trying to keep control of their shaking hand. When I finally stepped into the cabin, ignoring Tess's warning, the air changed. It didn't smell like rot, which would have made sense. Instead, it smelled like burned dust and metal, like the inside of an old machine after it overheats. The floor creaked under my boots. There were footprints in the dust, human-sized but going nowhere. They started in the middle of the room, crossed to the corners, then stopped cold. The dust itself was strange patterns brushed into it, circles and long lines, half erased like someone had tried to hide them. A single chair sat in the center of the room facing the wall. Not a table, not a bed, just that chair, positioned perfectly square, like someone had placed it there to watch the wood rot. In the corner, a cot sagged under its own weight, sunken like something heavy had slept there too long. A rusted iron stove stood against the far wall. I opened it out of curiosity and froze. Inside was another envelope. Same yellow paper, same wax seal. Same name, Marlin. I didn't open it. I slipped both envelopes into my backpack and zipped it shut. My pulse was hammering. I didn't know why. When Tess came back, we moved on without mentioning what we'd found. None of us said a word. That night, back at camp, I sat in my sleeping bag with my flashlight tucked under the fabric. Everyone else was asleep, their breath soft and even. I pulled the second envelope from my bag and carefully peeled the wax apart. Inside was a single line of text, printed neatly in faded ink. "Don't let it speak through your mouth." That was it. No name, no date. Just those words staring up at me. In the daylight the next morning, it was easier to laugh about it. I showed the group, and they joked about me reading forest poetry. Cass said it sounded like something her ex would write when he got high. The laughter helped, for a while. Then we went back to work. We were supposed to head towards Slate Bend that day, clearing out an overgrown drainage cut. Tess led the way with her compass and map spread against her thigh. The forest looked the same as before, dense, heavy, but I kept noticing strange things. A set of deer bones laid out in perfect symmetry beside the path, every rib aligned like an artist's arrangement. A black feather hanging from a branch that moved even when the air didn't. After about an hour, I noticed a tree, a twisted oak with roots coiling tight around themselves like a knot. I'd marked that exact tree yesterday with a red flag, which didn't make sense. We'd taken a completely different direction. Tess frowned, checking her compass. The needle was spinning slow, like it was dizzy, then stopped, pointing south, the opposite of where we were supposed to be heading. She looked uneasy for the first time since we'd met her. Then Cass gasped. The cabin was back. Same clearing, same porch, same crooked mailbox leaning on its rusted post. The ivy even hung in the same pattern across the wall. No one spoke. Tess just said, "Take 5 minutes, don't wander." Her voice was tight. I walked toward the tree line, hoping maybe I could see how we'd looped back. The air felt heavier there, pressing against my skin. I crouched, trying to trace our footprints, when I heard it. "Hey, I'm over here," my own voice. Not similar, identical. Tone, rhythm, even the same breath at the end. It came from behind the cabin. I froze. My stomach went hollow. I didn't answer, didn't move. I just listened. "Hey, come on," it called again, softer this time, almost pleading. I ran, burst through the brush, back to the group. Cass was staring past me, eyes wide. "You were just there," she said. "No, I wasn't." She blinked, confused. "You were wearing your red shirt. My shirt was green." Neither of us said anything after that. I told Tess what happened. She didn't laugh or tell me I imagined it. She just checked her radio, adjusted the dial, and told everyone to pack up. We started walking again, picking a new trail, moving fast. Every few minutes, someone would glance behind us. The forest felt wrong, like it was folding in on itself. Every path curved back toward the same clearing, no matter which direction we took. Then the cabin door slammed shut behind us. No one touched it. A second later, it creaked back open slowly like it was breathing. Tess lifted her radio to call for base. Static poured out, loud and harsh, and then, through the static, came my voice. "Marlon, it's okay. Come inside." She dropped the radio. No one said anything. We just started walking, fast, then faster. The trail bent downward, roots twisting under our boots. I could hear footsteps behind us, perfectly timed with ours at first, then quicker, like something trying to keep pace. A rasping voice, cracked and dry, whispered behind my ear. "Wait, please." Cass looked at me, pale as paper. Her lips moved soundlessly. "Don't look back." I didn't. None of us did. But we could hear it moving through the trees above, branches creaking, something heavy shifting from limb to limb. Then another voice joined, lower, slower, like the forest itself was speaking. "You already did. You already let me." That's when I remembered the first envelope, still sealed in my bag. Without thinking, I yanked it out and threw it into the underbrush. The sound it made when it hit the ground wasn't paper. It was wet, like something soft landing in mud. We didn't stop. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin. Gravel appeared under our boots. The ranger station sat at the end of the trail. Tess's truck parked exactly where we'd left it that morning. We climbed in. No one looked back. That night, after I got home, I emptied my coat pocket. My hands shook. There, folded neatly inside, was the second envelope, the one I'd burned in the sink. Except I hadn't. It was unmarked, but I could still smell the faint trace of smoke and wax. I tried to burn it again. The paper just smoked, curling at the edges but never catching. It took nearly 10 minutes before a single corner finally turned black. I watched until it was gone. Or I thought it was. Now, years later, sometimes I still hear my own voice in the woods behind my apartment. Soft, careful, whispering my name. Sometimes, when I stand by the creek near the back fence, I see my reflection moving a second too late. Sometimes it smiles before I do. And once, just once, I saw something standing across the water, thin and too tall, its head tilted wrong, its arms too long to be mine. It was waving, and in the breeze, faint but certain, I heard my voice call back. "It's okay, you already did." It started with a silence that didn't feel like peace. I was 32 when I joined the volunteer group that maintained forest trails out along the western spine of the Appalachia Range. My name's Lyle, and at that time I worked nights at a repair shop in a small town called Red Haven, fixing engines, replacing timing belts, and breathing fumes that never seemed to leave my clothes. The job paid fine, but the hours scraped away at me, and by the time daylight came, I'd lie awake, listening to the hum of old radiators and wondering if the noise in my head was just exhaustion or something else. I'd stopped drinking 2 years earlier, and the quiet that followed wasn't kind. Volunteering felt like something that might fill that gap, something with air and trees and purpose. The group was small, mostly older locals who knew the mountains better than the roads leading to them. They were the kind of people who still used paper maps marked in pencil and who thought phones were for emergencies only. I liked that about them. Every weekend, we took assignments: clear brush, fix signage, reinforce steps on steep grades. Nothing heroic, just the kind of maintenance that made sure hikers didn't wander off and vanish. That first morning on the new project, the coordinator handed me a folded topo map and a roll of bright red survey tape. The assignment was simple: flag a disused trail on the north slope of a ridge called Bramble's Edge, log hazards, and note coordinates. He warned me that no one had been there in a few years. The route washed out by storms, half erased by undergrowth. I said that was fine. I preferred working alone. I left Red Haven before dawn, the sky pale and the world colorless. The road narrowed until the asphalt ended and gravel took over, crunching under the tires. By 7:15 a.m., I parked beside a splintered wooden post jutting from the weeds like a broken bone. Whatever sign had once hung there was gone. The air smelled of pine sap and cold rock. I stepped out, shouldered my pack, and studied the path. It was barely visible, just a faint depression in the ferns leading into a tangle of spruce. The moment I entered, the sound changed. The forest swallowed the noise of the truck and the breeze from the valley, replacing it with a thick stillness. It wasn't unfriendly, just too quiet. No insects, no bird calls, only the soft scrape of my boots. I convinced myself it was because of altitude, or maybe the chill. I tied my first ribbon at a small fork near the charred remains of an enormous stump that looked struck by lightning decades ago, then kept walking. The trail climbed, weaving through a web of roots and mossy stones. I marked slippery rocks, ducked under low branches, and noted fallen limbs. After half an hour, I found a flat slab of stone big enough to sit on. I dropped my pack, drank some water, and pulled out my notebook. When I glanced up, I saw it. Another piece of red tape tied neatly to a thin birch branch about 20 feet ahead. My pulse quickened. It was the same color, the same knot, same fold, but I hadn't tied it. I hadn't even reached that spot yet. I checked the forest floor for my boot marks. The pine needles were mostly undisturbed. I convinced myself that maybe someone else from the group had come through earlier in the week. Still, the tape looked new clean, unfaded. I wrote it down in my notes and kept moving. As I climbed higher, the trail started bending left where the map said it should curve right. I frowned, unfolded the paper, and compared the contour lines. The ridge orientation didn't match. I pulled out my compass and waited for the needle to settle. It drifted lazily, then pointed south when I should have been facing northwest. I tapped it, shook it, but the reading stayed wrong. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I walked another 100 yards before finding a second ribbon, tied at eye level on a sapling. I untied it, compared it to mine. Identical. I pocketed it and pressed on. Not long after, I stumbled upon a cairn, a small pile of stones stacked with care. 3 at the base, 2 above, and 1 flat one balanced on top like a lid. A brittle twig was wedged between the upper stones. It wasn't accidental. Someone had built it deliberately. I didn't touch it. I just moved around it and felt, for the first time, watched. The canopy thickened until daylight turned gray. The forest seemed to drink color from everything. The trunks, the leaves, even the tape in my hand looked dull. I checked my watch, 11:53 a.m. It should have been bright. I paused, listening again. No sound. The kind of silence that pushes against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. Then came the ribbons. Not 1 or 2, but a cluster of them. 5, 6, maybe more, tied to the same tree-like ornaments. They swayed gently even though the air was still. I stepped closer, and that was when I realized the ground under me looked wrong. The trail behind me was smooth, clean, no boot scuffs, no broken twigs, and none of the flags I'd tied earlier. My skin prickled. I checked my compass again. The needle quivered, then swung around until it pointed directly back the way I came. I turned to follow it. My breathing sounded too loud in the emptiness. After a few minutes, I reached the same cairn again. Only now, the twig that had been wedged in it was gone. My hands were shaking when I adjusted my pack straps. I forced myself to keep walking, dragging my boot along the bark of trees as I passed, leaving scuffs so I'd know if I'd looped again. Not 10 minutes later, I heard the first sound. A sharp crack, like a heavy branch breaking somewhere behind me. I froze, waited, then another crack, closer. I didn't turn. I just started walking faster, then faster still until I was almost running. The silence pressed close again, heavier now, and something about it made me think that whatever had been making the noise had stopped, not because it was gone, but because it was waiting. When I saw daylight ahead through the trees, I nearly broke into a sprint. The trail opened onto the road, and I stumbled out beside my truck. But the post I'd seen that morning was different. Split clean down the middle, the halves peeled apart like something had forced its way through. I didn't stop to look. I threw my pack into the passenger seat and drove without glancing back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those ribbons shifting in still air. I told myself I must have misread the compass. Maybe there was magnetic interference from iron in the soil. But I couldn't explain the post, or the feeling that something had followed me out of the woods. The next morning, I called the coordinator. He told me no one had worked Bramble's Edge in nearly 3 years. The last entry in the logbook listed it as unsafe and inaccessible due to erosion. The man who filed that report had gone missing a month later during a solo hike. They never found him. A week passed before I gave in to curiosity and went back. This time I brought a friend, Matt Carson, another volunteer. He was the kind who laughed too easily, the kind you wanted around when things got tense. We reached the same turnout by mid-morning. Only now, there was no post, no visible trail, just wild grass and trees pressing close. We walked the shoulder for half an hour, scanning the slopes, but the ridgelines didn't match my map anymore. The forest had rearranged itself. Matt joked that maybe I'd been sleepwalking. I didn't laugh. While he checked his GPS, I kicked through the leaves near where my truck had been parked before. That's when I saw it. Something half buried in dirt, glinting dully in the sunlight. I knelt and pulled it free. A metal tag on a ball chain, the kind soldiers wear. The letters were worn, but I could still read a name. I slipped it into my pocket. Later that night, I searched the name online. It belonged to a park ranger declared missing 10 years ago, last seen conducting a survey near Bramble's Edge. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Over the next days, strange things kept happening. At home, I'd catch faint movements reflected in the window, like a pale face watching from behind me, though when I turned, there was nothing. Once, around 2:17 a.m., I woke to the sound of metal scraping against my porch railing. I went outside with a flashlight, and the beam caught something between the trees, a shimmer, like light bouncing off a mirror, but the forest was still. By the third night, I stopped trying to rationalize. I drove back to the mountains before sunrise, drawn by something I couldn't name. Mist crawled across the road like smoke, and when I reached the turnout, the post was there again, standing whole as if it had never broken. This time, a narrow footpath trailed beyond it. My heartbeat slowed, but my hands trembled when I lifted the flashlight. The path wound upward, the ground soft underfoot. Red ribbons hung at intervals, guiding me like breadcrumbs. I followed them until I came to an old ranger tower half hidden by fog. The steps creaked under my weight, and halfway up I heard it. The dragging sound of something moving beneath the structure, slow and deliberate, like limbs pulling through gravel. I froze, every muscle locked. The noise stopped. I waited, holding my breath, until a low creak echoed from below, followed by another scrape. I wanted to call out, to convince myself it was an animal, but my throat felt sealed. I turned back down, one slow step at a time, flashlight aimed at the ground. The air under the tower smelled of rust and damp wood. The dragging sound came again, closer now, and then something cold brushed the edge of my boot. I stumbled backward, nearly fell, swung the light, and saw nothing. Only dirt, stones, and the base of the supports. I didn't climb again. I ran until the forest thinned and light filtered through. The world outside looked ordinary, but my heart didn't slow for hours. That night, I left the dog tag on my kitchen table. Around midnight, it started to rattle on its own, metal clinking softly against the wood even though no wind stirred. I stared at it until the sound stopped. The next morning, it was gone. Sometimes I think about that first ribbon, the one that wasn't mine. I wonder if someone else is out there now, walking those same slopes, finding tapes that look freshly tied. When I dream, I see the tower again, hear the dragging under the floorboards, and smell the cold metal of that tag against my palm. I haven't gone back to the mountains since. But every once in a while, when the air is too still and the night too quiet, I swear I can hear it again. The slow scrape of something heavy pulling itself closer, waiting for me to remember the way back. I was 8 when I wandered from my uncle's trail, back when life was still small and safe. Every July, my family drove from Baton Rouge to stay with Uncle Wade in the hills above Merrill Creek, deep in the Appalachian backcountry. The drive took most of the day, winding through tunnels of green until the road turned to gravel and the radio gave up. Wade's cabin sat near the end of a forgotten logging road, half swallowed by the woods. To me, it was magic, the kind of place where the world felt bigger than it should be. Wade wasn't like my dad. Dad wore khaki pants, worked in an office, smelled like coffee and printer ink. Wade smelled like oil and pine sap. He had a beard like a curtain, arms covered in faded ink, and a voice that could roll a word into thunder. He'd been a mechanic once, maybe a carpenter too, but I never knew for sure. He lived alone, though he said he wasn't lonely. That always sounded strange to me. The forest behind his cabin stretched for miles, and even then I could tell it wasn't empty. It breathed. The air there never quite stopped moving, like something unseen kept shifting just beyond the trees. The animals didn't chatter like normal. The crickets sang only until sundown, and then the world went still. A thick, itchy stillness that pressed against your eardrums. Wade said that quiet was old, older than towns, older than language. Still, he made it feel safe. We built slingshots, carved sticks, welded bits of junk into strange shapes. He once helped me turn spoons into a tiny lizard that glimmered when the fire hit it. But every summer, the thing we waited for most was the switchback hunt. Wade said the switchbacks were mountain scavengers, part crow, part squirrel, with long black claws and a hunger for anything that glinted. He claimed they nested in bramble hollows miles beyond the trails. If you left something shiny out, they'd steal it and leave something strange behind. Maybe a bird skull, a feather twisted into a knot, or a coin melted into bark. He said they were mischief spirits, the kind that didn't mean harm until you disrespected the woods. We never believed it, not really, but we wanted to. Wade made it sound true, and maybe that was enough. That year, he said he'd found fresh prints beyond the fort past the stream. He looked serious when he said it. Told us the prints were bigger than usual. His grin didn't quite reach his eyes, and for a moment the air seemed heavier. When the day came, he handed us burlap sacks that smelled of mildew, passed around half-dead flashlights, and told us it was time. My older brother, 2 cousins, and I trailed behind him through the pines. The sun was sinking, the heat still clinging to the air. Fireflies blinked between tree trunks like nervous eyes. The deeper we went, the more the light faded. The forest swallowed sound. The path wound through gullies and hollows until the trees thickened above, hiding the sky. My flashlight flickered, its beam cutting more shadow than light. Then came the whistle, thin and sharp, slicing through the trees. Not one of us, not even close. Wade froze. He lifted his hand, eyes locked ahead, then moved toward the sound without a word. We followed, laughing, pretending to be brave, but the laughter died quick. The forest closed in, and the air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. I tried to keep up but tripped over a root, slid down a mossy slope, and landed hard among ferns. When I looked up, they were gone. No footsteps, no voices, just stillness. I called once, soft, nothing. I should have shouted. I didn't. Something deep inside told me noise wasn't safe. I sat there, half buried in leaves, clutching my flickering flashlight. The air smelled like wet earth and rust. Time slowed. My heart beat loud enough to hurt. Then I saw it. A shape between the trees. At first, I thought it was a dog, too big maybe, but close enough. Then it shifted, stepped into the weak circle of light, and every thought left me. It was wrong. Its body bent in ways no animal should. Legs jointed backward like a grasshopper's, arms too long, fingers curved into points. The skin looked stretched and bruised, patches of black hair crawling up its spine. Its head jerked as if pulled by invisible strings, then tilted. And it looked at me. Its eyes were dull, not glowing, just wet and empty. Its mouth opened and closed. No sound at first, then came this noise, a trembling moan, deep and hollow, like wind inside a bottle but thick with something human. I couldn't move. Couldn't even breathe. Then from behind me came the snap of a branch. Heavy, slow. For a heartbeat, I thought there were 2 of them. Then a voice broke the silence, raw, breathless. Mark. It was Wade. He crashed through the brush, grabbed me by the arm, yanked me upright. His face was pale beneath the beard. He didn't scold me, just looked like he'd found something he thought he'd lost forever. I told him what I saw. He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the trees. Finally, he said, "The woods play tricks at dusk. Best not to chase them," but his voice trembled. We never did another switchback hunt after that. Years passed. Wade stayed in those hills. The rest of us grew up and stopped visiting. Until last summer, when I got the call. He'd gone missing. His neighbor found the cabin door open, lights still on, coffee cold on the table. I drove up that same road, older now, the forest still endless. The cabin looked smaller, quieter. Dust clung to everything. A single burlap sack hung by the fireplace. I stayed that night. I shouldn't have. At 2:17 a.m., I woke to soft thuds outside. Thought it was a deer. Then came a sound, low and muffled, like laughter under breath. My heart clenched. I sat up, listened. The sound circled the cabin. A knock came at the window. Just one, slow, and slow. I froze. Then I heard it again, the same whistle from years ago. I grabbed the old walkie-talkie Wade had kept by the bed. It crackled to life, though I hadn't touched the button. A burst of static, then a voice, broken and distant. "Don't look for us." It repeated, softer each time until the signal faded. I stepped to the window. The yard was empty except for the line of trees, black against the starlight, and there, between two trunks, someone stood. A figure waving, slow and calm, like greeting an old friend. I opened the door. The night air hit cold. The figure was still there, arm raised. I walked forward, barefoot on damp earth, my breath fogged in the beam of the flashlight. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The forest was silent again, heavier than ever. I turned back toward the cabin, but something was standing at the tree line now, tall, bent, its head twitching the way I remembered. It made that same rattling moan, the sound that crawled inside your bones and stayed. I ran, locked the door, waited for dawn. When morning came, I found tracks by the porch prints, too wide, too deep, the shape not quite human. In the dirt lay a small object, shiny and clean. My childhood spoon lizard. That was the last time I went near Merrill Creek. But sometimes, late at night, when the air outside turns still and heavy, I hear the faintest whisper in the static of my phone, repeating in that same broken tone, "Don't look for us." And I don't, because I think I already know what I'd find if I did. I remember the first time I stopped hearing my own heartbeat. It was up there, somewhere past the last paved road, where the mountains fold into each other and sound forgets what it is. My name's Callum, and back then I worked maintenance at a local paper mill in a town so small it didn't even make the weather report. Burnout came quiet like mold under paint, and by the time I noticed, it was everywhere in me. That's when my cousin Rowan called. He said, in that calm way he always had, "You need air." "I've got space." He didn't explain what that meant, and I didn't ask. When the days start blurring together, you don't look for reasons, you just grab the first hand that reaches out. The road to his cabin wasn't really a road, just gravel biting under the tires and trees leaning so close they whispered against the truck windows. The forest had that heavy kind of silence, like it was listening. By the time we reached the ridge, the sun had slid down behind the hills, and the world went gray, like an old photograph left in the rain. The cabin sat crooked against the slope, its tin roof dented and scarred, porch half collapsed, windows clouded with age. Rowan stretched his back, muttered something about old boards holding old memories, then killed the engine. Inside smelled of pine resin and iron, a single room setup with a bed that groaned like it had lungs, a stove older than reason, and a dresser whose mirror had turned to fog. He tossed his pack onto the bed, face planted right beside it, and mumbled that he'd bring the maps later. His boots stayed on. His breathing turned ragged, like someone whispering through a wall. I laid out my sleeping bag on the wooden floor and tried to rest, but the roof started its quiet percussion, soft, endless plinking as the rain began. Every drop echoed sharp, like nails on tin. I stared into the dark, and waited for calm that never came. When my nerves started to buzz like wires, I got up, pulled on my jacket, and stepped outside. The rain had slowed to mist. The moon glowed behind the clouds, turning everything the color of old bone. The trees didn't move, but it still felt like they shifted when I wasn't looking, their trunks closer each time my eyes drifted. I walked the small clearing, breathing damp air that tasted of moss and iron. For a moment, I thought maybe the stillness could fix me. When I returned, Rowan hadn't moved. His arm hung off the bed, hand twitching now and then. I listened to the storm fade, the tin roof ticking slower and slower until the only sound left was my breathing. Morning arrived, pale and cold. Rowan was already gone, his pack missing, a note scrawled on a scrap of paper beside the stove, ridge paths behind the cabin. You'll see the view. Don't wander too far. His handwriting was sharp, all capitals. Beneath it, he'd drawn a rough map, arrows, dots, a trail that wound upward to something labeled Overlook. I figured a walk might help clear the static in my head. The trail started narrow, threading through tall pines that reached so high they made the sky look small. No birds, no wind. Just the crunch of my boots and that odd hum in my ears, low and steady, like the forest had its own pulse. About an hour in, the trees began to lean, their branches brushing my shoulders. The higher I climbed, the denser it got. My breath came slower, heavier. Still no birds, not even a single rustle. When I reached the ridge, it stole the air from my lungs. The world just fell away, hills rolling in blue waves under a thin veil of fog. I sat on a rock near the edge, trying to feel small enough to fit inside the silence. That's when I noticed something wrong. The pine I'd marked on my way up was gone, just gone. And where the trail should have been, there was nothing but unbroken forest. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, turned in a slow circle. Everything looked the same but slightly off, like the mountain had tilted while I wasn't paying attention. I pulled out Rowan's map. The landmarks were familiar, but they didn't match what surrounded me. I started walking downhill, certain I'd just taken a wrong turn. Then the trail markers changed. At first, they were faint red blazes on tree trunks, spaced like normal. Then more of them appeared, closer together, overlapping, some freshly painted, others nearly washed away. It stopped looking like a marked path. It started feeling like a maze. The air thickened, heavy as fog but dry. My skin prickled. Each step felt uncertain, like the earth moved half an inch under my boots. That's when I saw the coat. A green canvas jacket hung from a bent branch, sleeves too long, rain-soaked but not rotten. It looked recent. I called out, just a small sound. Nothing answered. Only that deep humming vibration like power lines somewhere too far to see. I walked past it, quickening my pace. A few yards later, another coat. Same fabric, same torn sleeve, same dark stains. My throat went dry. I didn't know how I could tell, but it was the same coat. I felt sure of it. The forest closed in tighter. The trees seemed to exhale warm air as I passed. My thoughts began to skip, heartbeat racing in my ears. Then I found footprints. Bare, human, pressed deep into the mud, each one perfectly formed, close together, as if the person had shuffled instead of walked. The ground around them rippled with water, yet the prints stayed crisp. That's when I heard it. A cough, soft but close, right behind me. I spun around. Empty space. Only trees, motionless. The hum grew louder, seeping into my bones, like a giant tuning fork buried beneath the hill. I turned back forward, and the coat was there again. Same stump. Same tier, but one sleeve was lifted, pointing deeper into the woods. I should have run. Instead, I followed. A few minutes later, the forest broke into a clearing I swear hadn't been there before. In the center sat a circular concrete platform, moss eating its edges. A rope ladder disappeared down into a hole at its center. The rim was carved with names, dozens of them, fading, eroded, some fresh enough to still shine pale against the gray stone. One name stood out, Rowan. My stomach twisted cold. I didn't speak. Didn't move. The hum rose until it felt like my skull would split. Then another cough, closer now, damp, almost warm. I felt the breath on my neck. I ran. Branches clawed my arms, roots dragged at my boots. The forest blurred around me until it was just streaks of green and gray. I burst out into an open corridor of power lines, sunlight hitting like an explosion. The silence broke, and with it, something in me cracked open. By the time I stumbled into the ranger station miles away, my voice was gone. Rowan was there already, sitting still, eyes fixed on the floor. When I told him what I'd seen, he just nodded, slow, tired. He said he'd worked that section before, long before the cabin, long before me. Then he looked up, and I swear the pupils in his eyes were gone. I didn't sleep that night. The ranger station felt too clean, too bright, its walls humming faintly like they were alive. Rowan had taken a bunk in the next room, lying perfectly still with his hands folded on his chest. Every so often, his breathing stopped long enough that I thought he was gone. At 2:17 a.m., something tapped the glass of my window, 3 times. Slow, then silence, then silence. I sat up, pulse drumming. The forest outside was a black mirror, nothing but the reflection of my face in a thin slice of moonlight. Then, just beyond the reflection, movement. Something white drifting past the tree line. It looked like a woman walking, her dress clinging wetly to her legs, her head tilted slightly as if listening. I blinked once, and she melted into the trunk of a pine, vanishing like smoke pulled backward. I didn't open the window. I just sat there until the first light bled into the sky. By morning, Rowan was gone again. No note, no sound of the truck. Only a faint mud trail leading back into the woods. I told myself I wouldn't follow, but I did. The trail looked wrong, like it had been dragged instead of walked. I passed the old power lines and stepped under the canopy again. The forest color seemed washed out, the air heavy with that same humming vibration. It wasn't just a sound now, it was in my bones, a pressure behind my eyes that pulsed with every step. After maybe an hour, I found the cabin again. The door hung open. Inside, everything was dusted with gray, as if months had passed overnight. The bed sagged, the stove rusted, and the mirror was cracked right through the center. On the floor lay a damp footprint, bare, human, facing the door. Something shifted on the porch wood, creaking slow, like weight moving. I froze. The air behind me thickened. Then, a whisper, not in my ears but under my skin. A sound more felt than heard, deep and trembling, like the world sighing through metal. I turned toward the doorway. A shape stood there, pale and lean, its outline trembling with the same hum. Its face was blurred, like fog pressed against glass. I blinked, and it was gone. Only the smell of wet pine remained. My hands shook as I backed out of the cabin. I ran until the trees began to blur again. The forest floor dipped and rose, confusing, endless. When I finally stopped, my watch read 7:45 p.m. I had no idea how the hours had passed. The sky above was streaked red, bleeding into purple, and for a moment I thought I saw the shape of the woman again between the trunks, the white dress faintly glowing, moving with a rhythm that didn't belong to the wind. I shouted, half plea, half anger. The humming deepened in reply. Then I saw them, dozens of coats hanging from branches, all the same, sleeves empty and swaying. Below them, more footprints pressed deep in the mud, circling a wide pit I hadn't noticed before. At its center was that same concrete ring, only now the carvings had multiplied. New names, still wet. One of them was mine. I stepped back, heart pounding. The air rippled. From inside the pit came a noise, soft at first, like rainwater hitting stone, then louder, rising into that bone-buzzing hum. The rope ladder twitched. Something was climbing up. I ran again, but the forest didn't move the same way anymore. Trees bent inward as if trying to block my path, their branches clawing at my jacket, snagging my hair. I tripped, fell, scrambled to my feet. Behind me came that dragging sound, like something wet being pulled through leaves. I stumbled into the clearing where the cabin had been. It was gone. In its place stood an old tent, canvas gray and slick with dew. Inside, a lantern flickered weakly. I pushed the flap aside and froze. Rowan sat there, or what was left of him. His skin was pale, almost translucent. His eyes rolled white. He was whispering to the dirt, voice cracked and hollow. The sound wasn't words, not anymore, just that same humming tone spilling out of his throat. When he looked up, his mouth didn't move, but the sound kept coming. I backed away, tripping over a root. He reached a hand toward me, skin stretching thin like wet paper. His lips finally formed words. "It found you." Then everything went dark. When I woke, I was lying in the ranger station again. Morning light poured through the window. A ranger I didn't know was sitting across from me, asking questions about how I'd been found wandering the power line trail in the middle of the night. I tried to explain. I told him about the coats, the names, the humming, the woman in white. He listened, nodding slowly, the way people do when they don't believe a word. He said Rowan had died 10 years ago, slipped during a survey, fell into an old water shaft near the ridge. They'd never recovered the body. I told him that was impossible. I'd been with Rowan yesterday. He just looked at me and said quietly, "That's what the others said too." Later that night, when they left me alone in the bunkhouse, the humming started again, faint through the floorboards, steady as a heartbeat. I pressed my ear to the wood. Beneath me, something moved. And when I looked toward the window, the reflection staring back wasn't mine. That night, the storm came back. The wind howled through the trees like a choir of broken flutes. Rain hit the roof in heavy bursts, drowning out everything else. I lay on the cot staring at the ceiling, waiting for the humming to return, but all I could hear was the storm trying to peel the walls away. Then, beneath the roar of thunder, came the softest sound, fabric shifting, canvas brushing against itself. The tent outside, someone was out there. I crept to the window. The world beyond was black except for flashes of lightning that lit the clearing in brief, terrible frames. Between flashes, the tent trembled, once, twice, like someone had placed a hand against it. The third time, it moved harder, almost lifted from the ground. I wanted to call out, but my throat had gone dry. When the next flash came, the shape standing beside the tent wasn't human. It was long, too long, its limbs bending the wrong way, its head tilted as if listening through the rain. The white dress clung to it, torn and hanging like wet paper. The light faded, and in the dark, I heard it whisper my name. I backed away from the window. The floor vibrated with that low hum again, the one that made my teeth ache. It rose through the boards, spreading up through my legs, into my chest. The bulbs overhead flickered once and went out. Something touched the door, one slow scrape. Then another. I grabbed the lantern from the desk and lit it with shaking hands. Its flame barely held against the wind. I stepped toward the door, every part of me screaming not to, but I opened it anyway. Outside, the storm had stopped. The air hung heavy, wet, still. The tent was gone. In its place stood the same concrete ring. The rope ladder swayed, though there was no wind. The carvings gleamed slick with rain, hundreds of names now wrapping all the way around like a crown. In the center, water had filled the hole, black and glassy. I took one step closer and saw the reflection, Rowan standing right behind me, his mouth moving, but no sound coming out. I turned, but he wasn't there. When I looked back down, the reflection had changed. It wasn't him anymore. It was me. Only, the version of me in the water was smiling. The humming deepened until it felt like the sky itself was shaking. My reflection's mouth opened wider, wider still, stretching far beyond human shape. Then I heard the cough again right by my ear. Warm breath on my neck, the reflection's hand rose out of the water, slow, dripping, reaching. I stumbled backward, tripped on a root, hit the ground hard. My lantern rolled into the grass and went out. Everything in black. Something cold wrapped around my ankle and pulled. The mud gave way under me. I clawed at the ground, kicked, screamed. My fingers caught the edge of the concrete, but whatever held me was stronger. It dragged me down, the forest spinning above, trees twisting like they were laughing. I hit water. It was freezing, thick as oil. My lungs seized. Below me, shapes moved in the dark faces, dozens of them, mouths open, all humming the same note. Their eyes glowed faintly like embers under ash. I saw Rowan among them, drifting closer, his expression calm now, almost peaceful. He reached out, touched my forehead with one wet finger, and whispered inside my skull, "Breathe." I woke up on dry ground. Morning light. Birds calling again for the first time in days. The forest looked normal, green and bright, like nothing had ever happened. The cabin stood intact, smoke rising lazily from the chimney. Rowan sat on the porch steps, smiling like it was any other morning. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The world felt thin, fragile. He looked at me and said softly, "You made it back." When I tried to ask how, my voice came out wrong, too deep, too slow, like the words were pushing through water. He nodded, stood up, and walked past me into the trees. As he went, the humming started again, faint but steady, fading with every step he took until only silence remained. I turned toward the cabin. On the doorframe, scratched deep into the wood, was a single line of text, my name. Fresh, wet, still bleeding sap. I touched it, and for a second, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere far off, a voice whispered my name again, and I realized it wasn't calling me from behind. It was calling from below. When the rangers found the cabin months later, they said it looked abandoned for years. No sign of struggle, just a single boot print by the door and a humming sound that came from somewhere underground, low and constant, until the moment they filled the hole with concrete again. Locals say if you hike the ridge at dusk, you can still hear it, the hum beneath your feet, the whisper in the trees. Some claim they've seen a man standing just inside the timberline, coat dripping, watching. They say he's still trying to breathe.